Of firewall help you in providing a better defense strategy. Now, whenever we talk about the design goals of a firewall, we normally say that when a firewall is deployed, all of the traffic, whether it is from inside to outside or the vice versa, will have to pass from the firewall. Okay, now when this thing has been established, how would this be accomplished? This would be accomplished by physically blocking all of the access to the local network. Okay, now for such a case, there are multiple configurations which are possible. One of the case could be that I'll directly deploy the firewall at the edge of the host, and depending upon the rules which are there onto the firewall, your packets would be filtered out. Okay, filtering out over here is we are saying that the entire traffic would pass through the firewall and your rules would be compared with the existing traffic. If found any deviation, you will drop the packet. Okay, so here only the authorized traffic, what would be referred as authorized? That traffic which is defined by certain local security policies. Okay, so this means that in the firewall, only the authorized traffic will be allowed to pass. Okay, so now there are multiple types of firewalls used which implement various types of security policies also. So depending upon these security policies, we have different firewalls. Okay, now we have an assumption that the firewall is immune to penetration. What this means that this implies that use of a very hardened system with a secured operating system will be there at the firewall. Okay, those systems which are hosting the firewall will be those systems which cannot have attack on it. That's why it is referred as that the firewall itself will be considered as it is immune to penetration. So no system or no traffic can alter the rules of the firewall. Okay, now there could be multiple access policies which are deployed at the firewall. So these access policies can range from IP address and protocol values. It can also include various authentication protocols. It can include users' identities or the network activity. So these are some of the points on what basis you will have a firewall deployed. Now, when I spoke about the first point, which was the IP address and protocol values. So what can be done is I can have those rules inside the firewall, or I can have the access policies at the firewall stage which controls the access based on the source or destination addresses and the port numbers or the direction of flow, whether it is inbound or an outbound, and other network and transport layer characteristics can also be incorporated within it. Okay, now when a firewall is based upon this set, that is IP address and protocol values, this type of firewall, when it has filtering on the basis of IP addresses and port numbers, is used by two type of firewalls. One is packet filter and the other one is stateful inspection firewall. Okay, we'll go ahead with this in later slides also. It is just an introduction. So there are two firewalls. One is packet filter and stateful inspection firewall who have their policies based upon IP address and the protocol values. Okay, so if you have these two specific things incorporated into a firewall, this would mean that Your firewall is limiting access to the specific services only. Okay. Next thing, I told you that we can have it on the basis of application protocol also. So you will have a firewall named as application level gateway that would be based upon the application. So for example, if you have any mail sent using XMTP, it would be considered as valid email. Or if you want to classify any email as a spam, then also you will compare it with the SMTP, check whether the mail has been sent using SMTP or not. You can also identify the HTTP web request to authorized certain sites. So if there are any other sites which are sending the messages other using any other protocol, you can classify them as those requests or responses which are not from a valid location. Okay, now here again, if you read out the point, what does it say? That the first capability which is offered by the firewall is that it defines a single choke point. So what does it mean? That a firewall has a single choke point where the attempts to keep unauthorized users out of the protected network can be incorporated. Okay, so you can provide protection from various kinds of IP spoofing and routing attacks. That means that any traffic which is directed, that is inbound or in outbound, would always be compared with the policies to find out any flaws in the incoming or outgoing traffic. Okay, next point was what is it saying? It provides a location for monitoring security events. The same thing, you can have audits and alarms also implemented on the firewall system. So it can prompt the user of the anomalies which are there. Okay. The other thing is that your firewall is a convenient platform for multiple functions that are not security related. So normally this includes network address translator, which actually maps the local addresses to the internet addresses, and network management function that generally audits or logs the internet usage. The firewall also serves as a platform for IPsec. So if you remember, your IPsec was something which was discussed in DDoS attacks. Normally, in case of IPsec, you are considering tunneling also. So that is why if you use the tunnel mode capabilities, which are provided by the IPsec, your firewall can be similarly used to implement the virtual private networks. Okay. Now, along with these capabilities which the firewall is offering, there are certain limitations also. So the first limitation which is being pointed out over here is that your firewall cannot protect against the attacks which are bypassed by the firewall. So there can be certain traffic which is according to the rules, and still it is allowed because the rules did not preempt the traffic to not flow. Okay, so that is why there are certain internal systems which have, let's say, mobile broadband capability to connect to an ISP. So normally an internal LAN may support a modem pool that provides dial-in capability for traveling employees and telecommuters. So that is why you can have certain situations where your firewall will not be very effective. Okay. Similarly, the as the second point says that it cannot protect fully against the internal threats. So what could be the possible internal threats? It could be that there can be an internal employee or who is willingly trying to uh, lure the attacker onto your network. This cannot be prevented by the firewalls. So he can manipulate the traffic which the external attacker is sending and can influence the internal organization's network. Also, it surpasses the firewalls. The next point says that you can have improperly secured wireless LANs. This may be accessed from outside the organization. So an internal firewall normally separates the portions of an external of an enterprise or organization network which cannot guide against wireless communications between local systems. Therefore, it cannot be very effective. And the final point says that since there are multiple mobile devices which are being used currently, and having either an internal or an external firewall will not suffice the situation of having a uh, intruder prone system. So you can obviously say that these devices may be used and infect outside the organization and then attached and used internally. So there are these types of firewalls which are normally used to monitor the traffic at different levels. Okay, so you will have a firewall which monitors from lower level network, which monitors the low level network packets. Now, these lower level network packets can either be monitored individually or it can be monitored as a part of the entire flow. Okay, the other thing which can be done is that you can have
हम लोग को भी लेफ्ट करना है क्या मैम?
मैम आई थिंक डिस्कनेक्ट हो गई हैं।
So till when did you guys hear? Did you guys hear when I was discussing about the fire types of firewall?
No, madam.
Ma'am, we just
No,
started types of firewall.
I just started it. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'll repeat again. Now, when we are talking about the types of firewall, I said that there are there is monitoring done on the flow of packets, and this monitoring is normally done level wise. Okay, so we can say that your firewall would monitor the network traffic at a number of levels. Now, there can be monitoring done from low level network packets. Either it could be done individually or it can be done as a part of the flow. Okay, so when you're doing it as a part of the flow, you would require all of the traffic within a transport connection, and you'll be inspecting the details of the application protocols also. So now the choice of which level is appropriate is determined by a desired firewall access policy. Okay, now your firewall access policy can operate as a positive filter, or it can be considered as it is operating the firewall as a negative filter. Okay, now we say that your firewall operates as a positive filter. This means that you're allowing to pass only the packets that meet specific criteria. Okay, so let's say there are five parameters, and you are only allowing those packets which are meeting three parameters. Okay, so this is the specific criteria that if our traffic only matches three parameters and the values are exact, then only you will pass the traffic. Okay, your filter, your firewall can also work as a negative filter. When it is working as a negative filter, you will reject any packet that meets certain criteria. Okay, so both of these are the opposites of each other. Now, the criteria implement the access policy for the firewall. Now, depending on the type of the firewall, you can examine one or more protocol headers in each packet. You can have the payloads of each packet or the pattern which is generated by a sequence of these packets. So we deal with this issue that which level or which filter would be firewall will be considered as a positive one and which one would be considered as a negative one. Now, the first firewall which is listed over here is the packet filtering firewall. Okay, so as I told you previously, your packet filtering firewall has rules which deal with the incoming and outgoing IP packets. That is, it is dealing with the packets which are flowing in both the directions. So filtering would also be done in both the directions, that is from and to the internal network. Okay, now depending upon the rules which are there in the incoming and outgoing IP packets, your packet filtering firewall would either forward the traffic or discard the packet. Okay, now as seen over here, the packet header will have the fields, five fields. Based on these five fields, your rules for packet filtering firewall will be developed. Okay, so you have source IP address, you have destination IP address, you have source and destination transport level address, that is the port number, you have the IP protocol field, and finally the interface. So source and destination IP address are the same, that your which is the source that is originating and that traffic is directed to which system. If these IP addresses match and both of these clients are allowed to communicate, then your rules will allow you your traffic or the packet to pass through. The other is source and destination transport level address. So here the transport level port number will be considered. For example, TCP and UDP will be considered, which specifically defines the applications like SNMP or Telnet, which are being used for transmitting the packets. Okay. Next is your IP protocol. This is normally the thing which defines the transport protocol. And finally, the interface, so which tells the firewall that there are three or more ports which will be used for communicating, which interface of the firewall the packet came from, or which interface of the firewall the packet is destined for. All of these informations will be there. So an example for the rules for such case is your rule set E. All of these A, B, C, D are also valid. So one of the example can be this. Now the actions over here tells you that depending upon the parameters value or depending upon the values of the incoming and outgoing traffic, you will block, you'll either allow the traffic or you will block the traffic. Okay. Now the packet filter is typically set up as a list of rules based on, so these are the list of the rules based on matches to the field in the IP or the TCP header. Now, if there is a match to one of the rules, that rule is invoked to determine whether to forward or to discard the packet. Okay. If there is no match to any rule, then a default action is taken. Okay. If there is a match, then what would happen? Your rule will be invoked and the action which is corresponding to that particular rule will be taken place, whether it is to forward or to discard the packet. Had there been a case that there is no match to the existing rules, okay, then a default action needs to be taken place. What are the default actions? These default actions or these default policies are categorized into two. So this means that there will be two possible default cases. Okay, one is referred as default discard and the other one is referred as default forward. Okay, now when a default discard happens, this means that which is not expressly permitted is prohibited. Okay, the thing which is not expressly permitted is prohibited. So whose all of the informations or let's say all these five parameters information is not explicitly given and is not matching, then what you'll do, you'll prohibit that packet. Okay. Second case is default forward. That which is not expressly prohibited is permitted. So that rule which is not said that all of these, if these three parameters or if these all five parameters are not obeyed, you are not discarding it. Okay. In that case, you'll not prohibit that particular messages. You'll allow that message to be forwarded. Okay. So normally you can see that the default discard policy which is here, that is the first one, is very conservative. Okay. So according to this, initially everything is blocked and your services must be added on a very case by case basis. Okay. Now this policy is very evident to those users who are more likely to see the firewall as a proper place of hindrance. Okay, so when I said that it's a proper place of hindrance, that every packet which is present at the firewall or is reaching the firewall, in maximum of the cases, it would be dropped. Okay, so that is why it can be seen that it's a hindrance in sending the packets or delivering the packets. Okay, but this is the policy which is normally likely to be preferred in government organization or in any business organization. Okay. Now, further, there were advancements done in this default discard policy for the user's visibility. Okay. That is why there came the second policy, which is referred as the default forward policy. Now, the default forward policy increases the ease of use for all users, all end users, and it provides very less security. That is, it provides reduced security, which was much higher in case of a discard policy. Okay. Now, the security administrators must reach out to very new security threat as it is becoming known, and then try to develop that rule, add it into the default forward policy to make it more secured. Okay. Normally, the default forward policy is adopted in very open organization. Let's say universities or the institutes are adopting the default forward case. Okay. Now, you have a case of, let's say, there is a traffic here. Okay. So, it is not listed in this. So, let's say there is a traffic which is, or there is a filtering example which is there, which has the information of source address, destination address, protocol, destination port, and finally you have an action which is taking place. Okay. So you can have the values of source addresses either in the numerical form, or it can be saying that there is an external source address or it's an internal source address. Okay. Then you can have, so let's say there is a traffic which shows that the source address is external, destination address is internal, protocol which is used is TCP, destination port is 25, and action is permit. Okay, clear? What does this mean? This means that the inbound mail from an external source is allowed. Okay, the incoming is traffic is from the is using SMTP. It is using the port number 25, and you are allowing the traffic. Okay. Similarly, there can be other rules also incorporated. For example, you guys can write down the rule. If I say that the rule is your source address is any, your destination address is also any, your protocol is also any, your destination port is also having the value as any, and the action is deny. Okay, and there's one more column which talks about direction, which says either. Okay, did you guys write it?
Yes, ma'am.
What does this mean? I'll repeat what I said. Source, destination, protocol, destination port, all of these have any as the information. Your action is deny and your direction is either. What does this rule mean?
It will block all traffic from either direction, yeah, no matter what the host and the source is.
So you can say that it is a default policy. Okay, so this is an explicit statement for a default policy. All rule which sets this include this rule implicitly as the last rule. Okay, so it will block all of the incoming or the outgoing traffic from any of the source or destination ports, or from any of the source or destination addresses, whether it is from any SMT valid port or whether it is from any invalid port, all of the packets will be dropped. Okay, now write another rule which has source addresses value as external, destination address as internal, protocol as TCP, destination port as greater than 1023, action is permit, and direction is in. What does this mean?
All incoming TCP connections from outside to internal are allowed if the port number is greater than 1023.
So this can be summarized as it is a response to an inbound SMTP connection. Okay, so whatever response will be there for a valid SMTP connection or an inbound SMTP connection, all of these responses will be allowed. Okay, now this rule allows the external traffic to any destination port which is above the 1023. Okay, now for an example, to exploit this rule, an external attacker can open a connection from the attacker's port, let's say he's using 5150, to an internal web proxy server on port number 8080. Okay, will this be allowed?
Yes,
I'll
ma'am.
repeat the statement. For example, your attacker is trying to exploit this rule. Okay, how is it doing? Your external attacker is opening a connection from the attacker's port 5150 to an internal web proxy server on port 8080. Will this be allowed or will this be forbidden?
Yes, ma'am, this will be allowed.
Technically, this needs to be forbidden. Okay, but it could allow on an attack on the server. Now to counter this attack, the firewall rule can be configured with a source port field for each row. Okay, so I can have one more rule which talks about the same thing where your source address can be internal, your destination address can be external, and rest things are same. Your direction could be out. Okay, so for your rules given above, your source port number, if it is set to 25, clear, then you can prevent this. If I set my source port as 25, then the attack which is possibly happening in the previous case can be prevented. Any doubt? Any doubt? Is it clear or should I explain it once again?
Can you explain it once again?
Okay, so we'll move forward with the packet filter firewall. Now coming to the weaknesses and the possible attacks which can happen on the packet filter firewall. First is talk about the advantage. It's very simple in its implementation. These filters are transparent to the users and are very fast because the rules which are developed on the packet filtering are on the basis of those above 5 fields which we discussed. Now, the weaknesses which can be there is your packet filter firewall doesn't examine the upper layer data. So when they are not examining the upper layer data, they cannot prevent the attacks that employ the application specific vulnerabilities or the functions. So for example, a packet filter firewall cannot block the specific application commands. And if a packet filter firewall allows a given application, all of the functions available with that particular application will be permitted. Okay. Next is the other thing which says that since there is limited information available at the firewall end, the logging functionality which is present in the packet filter firewall will also be limited. And normally the packet filter logs only the same information which is used to make access control decisions. That is source addresses, destination addresses, and the type of traffic. The third thing which is there is that mostly the packet filter firewall do not support user authentication schemes. So, which is obviously the add-on which is provided by the upper layers, that is the application layer. And this is due to the fact that since the packet filtering is lacking the upper layer functionality, it will also not have the user authentication schemes incorporated within it. The fourth thing is that uh, these firewalls are generally vulnerable to attacks. Okay, and the exploits which are taking place at the taking the advantages of the problems which are associated with the TCP and IP. What is the major disadvantage? The spoofing, that is the network layer address spoofing is major disadvantage which cannot be handled by the packet filter firewalls. Now, a final thing which is a weakness is that there are small number of variables which are used in the access control decisions. And these packet filter firewalls are susceptible to security breaches which are normally caused by improper configurations. Now, it means that it is very easy to accidentally configure a packet filter firewall to allow the traffic types which should actually be denied based on the information security policies. So these are the possible weaknesses of the packet filter firewall, which can be overcome in the other different firewalls which have been proposed. Okay, now the packet filter firewalls are prone to some of the attacks. Okay, for example, as told previously, these are prone to IP address spoofing. These are also prone to source routing attacks and tiny fragment attacks. So we'll discuss the three attacks in the later class and find out that what are the possible defenses or possible countermeasures which are introduced in the packet filter firewall to avoid these attacks, or how are these handled in different firewalls. Okay, so uh, I'll go ahead with this in tomorrow's class. I'll send you the document. Please go through it so that I can speed up in the tomorrow's class. Okay. So tomorrow I basically cover the important aspects which are there in the firewalls, and possibly tomorrow would be the last class for this course. If I'm not able to cover it, I'll take it in the next class. Okay. And what date did I tell you for your major? Okay. Okay. So you all are okay if I take it on Sunday?
No, ma'am.
Why?
Ma'am, actually, I'm going to be admitted on Thursday.
What should I say in this regard now? On
Ma'am,
Thursday, you
actually,
know.
can you please postpone to the December? Means to because everyone is taking in the mid of December. Like
Mid of
Patnaik
December.
sir, yes, Patnaik sir is taking in the first week. Pinku sir is also taking in the 14th, I think.
Mm, First week of December, will it be okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Second or third? Ujjwal,
Yes,
are
ma'am.
you okay in second and third?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I'll take it on third then. 3rd of
जी.
December.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, so then obviously you have time. Then I'll take the class tomorrow as well as day after tomorrow. Okay, so I'll drop a
जी.
mail and tell you the timings accordingly. 3rd of December. Okay.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, could you please tell us marks of minor 1 and minor 2?
Oh, I have not yet checked it. I'll tell it to you before your major.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you,
You
ma'am.
all have submitted one assignment as well, na? So I'll
Yes, ma'am.
before your major. पहले के दो कितने के थे? 20-20 के थे ना पहले के दो? 40 और 10 मार्क्स का असाइनमेंट, 50 मार्क्स का मेजर होगा। ठीक है?
मैम अटेंडेंस के नंबर नहीं है?
नहीं, कोई अटेंडेंस के नंबर नहीं है। आधे लोग ऑनलाइन होकर के चले जाते हैं, उनके मार्क्स नहीं होते हैं।
मैम कितने टाइम के लिए होगा?
मैम
क्या?
मोड क्या होगा?
मेले की टाइम
You are not audible. Please be louder.
मैम ड्यूरेशन मेजर हाँ कितने मार्क्स के लिए?
ड्यूरेशन ऑफ मेजर
यस मैम।
वही होगा 1 घंटा पौन घंटे का, उससे ज्यादा नहीं होगा।
कितने मार्क्स
वही होगा ना मोड?
मार्क्स का ही होगा और यू विल हैव ओनली 45 मिनट्स फॉर इट।
मैम
मोड क्या होगा?
क्या होगा?
मैम
ऑब्जेक्टिव
मोड
होगा।
क्या होगा?
ऑब्जेक्टिव प्लस एमसीक्यू। सॉरी, दैट इज सेम। ऑब्जेक्टिव प्लस सब्जेक्टिव बोथ।
मैम तो गूगल फॉर्म्स में ही होगा ये भी?
गूगल फॉर्म्स में नहीं होगा। भैया क्या मिला थैंक यू। जैसा आपके बाकी लास्ट टाइम पे अभी जो हुआ था ना वैसा ही होगा।
ओके मैम, ओके।
ओके मैम।
सिमिलरली योर लैब ऑल्सो, तो फिर मैं लैब भी आपका तभी लूंगी जब आपका ये ले रही हूँ। ठीक है, तो
यस
अगर
मैम।
थर्ड को ये होगा तो मैं आपका लैब फोर्थ को ले लूंगी।
ओके मैम,
ठीक है।
ओके मैम।
ओके।
Okay, I'll drop the official mails regarding this on your classroom itself so that there aren't any clashes. Okay?
मैम लैब एग्जाम में प्रोग्राम हमें लिखना होगा?
क्या बेटा?
लैब एग्जाम में
हाँ,
प्रोग्राम हमें लिखना होगा, मतलब जैसे
नहीं लिखना नहीं होगा आपको। जैसे अभी आपको असाइनमेंट्स भेज दिए जाते हैं ना, वही एक उसी तरीके का एक असाइनमेंट आपको भेजा जाएगा। You will have to work it out and submit it. There
Okay,
would
ma'am.
be 1 hour or 2 hours given to you. Within that duration, you'll have to do it and submit your PDFs.
Ma'am, in
Okay.
LaTeX we have to submit.
Yes, you'll have to submit it in LaTeX. Everybody has submitted all of the lab assignments which have been given to you till now. There are 1 or 2
जी.
students who have not submitted it.
Yes, ma'am.
Please submit them. LaTeX वाला मैंने नहीं दिया अभी आपको, तो कल जो आपका लैब होगा, कल ही है ना, वेडनेसडे है। ओके, तो मैं कल के लिए आपको एक असाइनमेंट भेज दूंगी which would be regarding LaTeX only.
Okay, ma'am.
So you submit it according to the deadline which is given, and then later on, if you are asked to write one more assignment on NS2, then you do it in LaTeX. Okay.
मैम अभी
Any other doubt?
दिया था, लेटेक्स में दिया था जो NS2 का था।
अच्छा, पिछली बार वाला आपने लेटेक्स में ही दिया है क्या?
यस मैम, यस मैम।
ठीक है,
Yes,
फिर
yes,
आगे
ma'am,
के
LaTeX
जितने
में।
भी असाइनमेंट है वो आप लेटेक्स में ही दीजिए। ओके।